They put the human in the zero oxygen test until she outlasted 3 species with double lung capacity. Then they checked if their equipment was malfunctioning, which was a reasonable response to watching someone violate every known biological principle through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Let me tell you about the day I learned that human respiratory efficiency isn't about lung capacity, it's about spite directed at the concept of suffocation itself. Spoiler alert, the most dangerous thing you can tell a human is that something is physiologically impossible. They take it as a personal challenge. My name is Dr. Thesik Vorn, Chief Xenophysiology Researcher at the Galactic Medical Institute, and I have studied respiratory systems for 31 standard cycles. I have documented breathing mechanisms across 156 different species, analyzed oxygen utilization efficiency in environments ranging from dense atmospheres to near vacuum conditions, and published 47 peer-reviewed papers on comparative respiratory biology. Point is, I know how breathing works. I understand oxygen transport, cellular respiration, the limits of anaerobic metabolism. I can predict survival duration in oxygen-depleted environments based on species biology, physical conditioning, and metabolic efficiency. I have tested hundreds of subjects from dozens of species, and my models have been accurate to within 3% margin of error. Until the human. The test was part of standard emergency preparedness training for deep space personnel. Space travel involves inherent risks of depressurization, atmospheric system failures, environments where breathable air becomes suddenly unavailable. Understanding survival limits in zero-oxygen conditions was critical for developing emergency protocols, designing life support systems, and training personnel for worst-case scenarios. The protocol was straightforward. Subjects entered a sealed chamber with atmospheric controls, started with normal breathing conditions, then oxygen levels gradually reduced to zero over 60 seconds. Subjects remained in zero-oxygen environment until physiological distress reached dangerous levels, at which point they signaled for extraction or monitoring systems automatically terminated the test to prevent serious harm. Most species lasted between 90 seconds and 4 minutes depending on lung capacity, metabolic efficiency, and training. The current record was held by a Krelian military specialist who had managed 7 minutes and 42 seconds through combination of superior lung capacity, efficient oxygen utilization, and extensive breath control training. That record had stood for 3 years. Dr. Yalith, my Vraxian research partner, had insisted we needed human subjects for the database. Humans are becoming increasingly present in deep space operations. We need baseline data on their respiratory limits for proper emergency protocol development. Humans have average respiratory capacity, I said, reviewing available biological data. Standard bipedal configuration, single-chamber lungs, nothing remarkable about their oxygen transport mechanisms. They'll probably fall somewhere in the middle range of our existing data, still worth documenting, Yalith insisted. For completion if nothing else, so we recruited human volunteers from the station's civilian population. The first 2 performed exactly as predicted, lasting between 2 and 3 minutes before physiological stress required extraction. Unremarkable results that confirmed my assessment of human respiratory capabilities as thoroughly average. Then came Subject 3. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, security personnel with the Terran Colonial Authority. Age 29 standard years, athletic build, service record showing regular physical conditioning and emergency response training. Her preliminary medical screening showed normal human physiology, nothing unusual about lung capacity or cardiovascular function. Lieutenant Chen, I said during the pre-test briefing. The procedure is simple. You'll breathe normally as oxygen levels decrease, then hold your breath when oxygen reaches zero. Signal when you need to terminate the test, or our monitoring systems will extract you automatically if we detect dangerous physiological stress. Most humans last between 2 and 3 minutes. If you make it to 4 minutes, that's excellent performance. What's the current record? Chen asked. 7 minutes, 42 seconds. Held by a Krelian with approximately double your lung capacity and 15 years of specialized breath control training. But that's not a realistic target for human physiology. Sounds like a challenge, Chen said, and something about the way she smiled made my research instincts activate warning protocols. It's not a challenge, it's biological reality. Please don't push beyond safe limits trying to compete with species that have superior respiratory capabilities. Right, sure, Chen said, but that smile hadn't changed. She entered the test chamber, and we began the protocol. Baseline measurements were normal, respiratory rate steady, oxygen saturation optimal. As we began reducing atmospheric oxygen, Chen's breathing deepened slightly, compensating for decreasing availability, exactly as expected. Oxygen reached 0 at the 60-second mark. Chen took one final deep breath and settled into stillness, her expression calm and focused. The monitoring systems tracked her vitals continuously, oxygen saturation in her bloodstream, heart rate, neural activity, everything we needed to ensure subject safety. 2 minutes, Yalith announced, watching the displays. Oxygen saturation dropping normally. She's doing fine. 3 minutes, I said as the timer continued. Still within expected range, though she's performing well for a human subject. Chen remained still, her eyes closed, breathing obviously suspended. Her heart rate had slowed significantly, which was normal as the body conserved oxygen during breath holding. Oxygen saturation was decreasing steadily but not alarmingly. 4 minutes, Yalith said. That's excellent for human physiology. She should signal extraction soon, except Chen didn't signal. She continued sitting motionless, showing no signs of distress or urgent need for oxygen. 5 minutes, I said, checking the monitoring systems to ensure they were functioning correctly. This is unusual. Human anaerobic metabolism shouldn't support this duration comfortably. Maybe she has exceptional training, Yalith suggested. Or genetic variation in oxygen utilization efficiency. Possible, but this is significantly beyond normal human range. She should be experiencing severe discomfort by now. Chen's expression remained calm. If she was experiencing distress, she was hiding it remarkably well. 6 minutes, Yalith announced, her crystalline structure flickering with colors that indicated confusion. She's approaching the Krellian record. This shouldn't be possible for human physiology. Check the chamber oxygen levels, I said. Make sure we actually achieved 0 oxygen environment. Yalith ran diagnostics on the atmospheric systems. Oxygen is definitely 0. The chamber is working correctly. She's actually doing this. 7 minutes, I said, watching in disbelief as Chen passed the point where most species with superior lung capacity would have been desperately signaling for extraction. Her oxygen saturation is critically low. Automatic extraction should trigger soon, except the automatic systems didn't trigger because Chen's vitals, while stressed, remained just barely within parameters we had established as survivable. She was riding the absolute edge of physiological limits, but somehow not crossing into dangerous territory that would force termination. 8 minutes, Yalith said quietly. She just broke the record. She's outlasting species with double her lung capacity. This is impossible, I said, running diagnostics on every monitoring system we had. There must be equipment malfunction. Human biology doesn't support this performance level. All systems are functioning correctly, Yalith confirmed. She's actually doing this. The human is somehow surviving 0 oxygen conditions longer than species specifically adapted for breath holding. Chen opened her eyes at the 8-minute, 30-second mark. Made eye contact with the observation window. And smiled again, that same challenging expression from before the test started. Then she settled back, closed her eyes, and continued holding her breath. 9 minutes, I said, my voice barely audible. This is completely outside known human respiratory capabilities. Should we terminate the test? Yalith asked. Her oxygen saturation is critically low. Much longer and we risk serious neural damage. Her vitals are still technically within survivable range, and she hasn't signaled for extraction. We continue until she signals or automatic systems trigger. 10 minutes, Yalith announced as the timer clicked over. This is beyond any species in our database except the Corvathi, and they have specialized oxygen-storing organs that humans completely lack. At 10 minutes and 47 seconds, Chen finally signaled for extraction. We immediately restored normal atmosphere, and she gasped in several deep breaths, her oxygen saturation rapidly improving. But even her recovery was faster than predicted, her respiratory and cardiovascular systems bouncing back with unexpected efficiency. I entered the chamber as soon as safety protocols allowed. Lieutenant Chen, how did you do that? That performance is completely inconsistent with human respiratory biology. Meditation training, Chen said, still breathing deeply but already looking recovered. Plus some techniques I learned from freediving communities back on Earth. Meditation and freediving don't explain surviving 0 oxygen for nearly 11 minutes. Species with double your lung capacity can't achieve those results. Yeah, but they probably don't have the same motivation, Chen said. You told me it was impossible for human physiology. I don't respond well to being told what I can't do, so you risk serious injury to prove a point. I didn't risk anything, Chen said. I knew my limits. I've trained for this kind of thing. Humans have been doing competitive breath-holding for thousands of years. The current Earth record for static apnea is over 24 minutes. I stared at her. That's impossible. That would require oxygen storage capacity that humans don't possess. It requires training your body to use oxygen more efficiently and your mind to stay calm under stress, Chen corrected. We don't have bigger lungs, so we learn to make better use of what we have. Lowered heart rate, reduced metabolic demand, optimized oxygen distribution to critical systems. That's what meditation and breath work training accomplishes. Even with optimal efficiency, human biology has theoretical limits, I protested. You can't simply override physiology through training, can't I? Chen asked. Because I just did. Look, Dr. Vorn, humans are really good at pushing past supposed limitations. We evolved on a planet that kept trying to kill us, so we learned to survive things that should be unsurvivable. Holding your breath for a long time is honestly one of our less impressive adaptations. She stood up, movement steady despite having just spent nearly 11 minutes without oxygen. Where do I sign the test completion forms? I need to get back to my duty shift. Yalith processed Chen's paperwork while I reviewed the test data repeatedly, trying to understand what had happened. Every measurement was accurate, every system had functioned correctly. Chen had simply performed far beyond what human biology should allow. How? I asked Yalith later, reviewing the recordings frame by frame. How does a species with average respiratory capacity outperform species specifically adapted for breath holding? The same way they do everything else that should be impossible, Yalith said. Through training, determination, and apparently complete disregard for biological limitations, but there must be a mechanism. Some physiological adaptation we're not detecting. There is, said a voice behind us, and we turned to find Dr. Keiko Tanaka, a human physician who worked in the station's medical bay. May I see the test results? I pulled up Chen's data, and Tanaka reviewed it with professional interest. Ah, yes. She's using the mammalian diving reflex combined with meditation techniques to achieve extreme metabolic suppression. Very impressive control. Mammalian diving reflex? I asked. Humans evolved from species that spent time in water, Tanaka explained. When human faces contact cold water, or when we voluntarily hold our breath, our bodies trigger automatic responses. Heart rate slows dramatically, blood vessels constrict in extremities to preserve oxygen for brain and vital organs, metabolic rate decreases. It's a vestigial adaptation from our aquatic evolutionary ancestors that doesn't explain 11 minutes of survival with zero oxygen by itself, no, Tanaka agreed. But combined with trained meditation techniques that further reduce metabolic demand, conscious control of normally automatic physiological processes, and simple stubborn determination not to quit, humans can achieve remarkable results. Lieutenant Chen clearly has extensive training in breathwork and meditation. She's optimized her natural diving reflex through years of practice. She said the Earth record is over 24 minutes, I said. That seems biologically impossible even with these adaptations. The record is actually 24 minutes and 37 seconds, Tanaka said. Set by a professional freediver who spent years training specifically for static apnea. And before you ask, yes, that was verified under controlled conditions with medical monitoring. Humans can do extraordinary things when we train obsessively and refuse to accept limitations. But why? I asked. Why would humans invest years of training to hold their breath for absurd durations? What's the evolutionary benefit? There isn't one, Tanaka said cheerfully. That's the point. Humans don't just adapt to survive, we push boundaries because boundaries bother us. We see a limit and immediately start figuring out how to exceed it. That's not evolution, that's culture. We teach ourselves to do impossible things because being told something is impossible makes us want to prove otherwise. She gestured at the test data. Lieutenant Chen probably didn't need to last 11 minutes. She could have signaled at 4 minutes and still contributed useful data to your research. But you told her human physiology couldn't compete with species that have superior lung capacity. So she made it her personal mission to prove you wrong. That's extremely human behavior. Over the following weeks, word spread about Chen's performance, and I started receiving requests from other human subjects who wanted to attempt the test. Apparently, the news that Chen had broken the station record had triggered competitive instincts across the entire human population. This is not a competition, I tried to explain to the queue of humans who showed up requesting test appointments. This is scientific research on respiratory limits, right? Yeah, totally scientific, said the next volunteer, a cargo handler named Marcus Webb. What's the current record? Still Chen's 11 minutes. I bet I can beat that, this is exactly what I'm talking about, I said to Yalith. Humans treat everything like a competition, even physiological testing that should be objective measurement, let them compete, Yalith said. We'll get more data. Maybe we'll start to understand the mechanisms behind their unusual performance. Marcus Webb lasted 9 minutes and 15 seconds, which was still extraordinary for human physiology but not enough to beat Chen's record. He seemed disappointed by this outcome despite having just demonstrated survival capacity that exceeded species with far superior respiratory systems. The volunteer after Webb managed 10 minutes and 8 seconds. The one after that achieved 8 minutes and 52 seconds. Every single human subject vastly outperformed our initial predictions based on their biological specifications. There's something systematically wrong with our human respiratory models, I said, revising calculations for the 4th time. Either that, or every human on this station has exceptional training in breath-holding techniques, or humans are just better at this than we predicted, Yalith suggested. Maybe average lung capacity doesn't correlate directly with breath-holding performance when you factor in cultural practices, training methodologies, and sheer stubborn determination. 2 weeks after the initial test, Lieutenant Chen appeared at my office. Dr. Vorn, I heard you're still getting human volunteers for the oxygen deprivation test. Word spread, I said. Your performance apparently triggered competitive instincts across your entire species. Yeah, that sounds about right, Chen said. Humans are terrible about turning everything into competition. But I had a thought about your research. What thought? You're testing individuals in isolation, measuring personal limits. But humans evolved as social species. We do better in groups. Want to see what happens if you test team performance instead of individual? How would that work? We can only monitor one subject at a time in the chamber, not in the chamber, Chen said. In actual emergency scenarios. Simulated, obviously, but realistic. Put a team of mixed species in a situation where oxygen becomes limited, see how they respond, how they coordinate, how humans perform when we're trying to keep others alive instead of just ourselves. It was an interesting research question. Emergency scenarios rarely involved individuals in isolation. They involved teams, coordination, shared resources, social dynamics that might affect performance significantly. I can design a protocol, I said. Multi-species teams in simulated emergency scenarios with progressive oxygen depletion. We measure both individual performance and team coordination. Perfect, Chen said. And just so you know, humans perform way better when we're protecting others than when we're just trying to survive ourselves. Something about our social bonding and protective instincts overrides normal physiological limitations. That seems unlikely from a biological perspective. Everything about humans seems unlikely from a biological perspective, Chen said. But we keep doing impossible things anyway. Might as well study it properly. The team scenario tests were revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. When placed in emergency simulations with oxygen depletion, human subjects consistently prioritized other species' survival over their own. They would identify which species had lowest oxygen tolerance, ensure those individuals got supplemental oxygen first, and voluntarily endure extended periods without oxygen to preserve resources for others. In one simulation, a human engineer named Patricia Okonkwo kept a 3-person team alive for 47 minutes in a progressively oxygen-depleted environment by carefully managing limited emergency oxygen supplies. She gave herself minimal oxygen supplementation while ensuring her plenary and Vraxian teammates received adequate supply for their higher metabolic needs. How are you still conscious? I asked Okonkwo during the debriefing. Your oxygen saturation was critically low for over 30 minutes, adrenaline and spite, Okonkwo said. Also, I knew if I passed out, my teammates wouldn't know how to operate the emergency systems. So I stayed conscious through sheer determination not to let them die because I was too weak to push some buttons. That's not how physiology works. You can't simply choose to remain conscious when oxygen levels are insufficient for neural function, can't I? Okonkwo asked. Because I just did. Look, humans have this thing where we can temporarily override normal limitations when other people depend on us. Adrenaline, endorphins, whatever. The body finds reserves it didn't know it had because the alternative is unacceptable. You risked permanent neural damage. I risked my teammates dying because I wasn't tough enough, Okonkwo corrected. That was unacceptable. Some neural damage I can recover from. Letting people die because I gave up, that I couldn't live with. I was beginning to understand something fundamental about human physiology that our models had completely missed. Humans didn't just have respiratory systems and metabolic processes. They had psychological factors that directly influenced physiological performance, and those psychological factors were incredibly powerful when social bonds and protective instincts activated. We need to completely revise our human emergency protocols, I told the Galactic Medical Institute during my presentation of the research findings. Human survival capabilities in oxygen-depleted environments are substantially greater than biological models predict, particularly in scenarios involving social bonds and protective motivation. How much greater? Asked the institute director. Conservatively, 200 to 300% greater than initial models suggested. In optimal conditions with proper training and sufficient motivation, possibly 500% or more. We documented cases of humans maintaining consciousness and performing complex tasks with oxygen saturation levels that should result in immediate neural shutdown. That's impossible, said Dr. Krenith, a Thorian physiologist. Neural tissue requires minimum oxygen levels for function. You can't simply will yourself to remain conscious when those requirements aren't met. Humans apparently can, I said. We have extensive documentation. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but the results are undeniable. Humans routinely exceed predicted survival limits in oxygen-deprived environments, particularly when protecting others or pursuing goals they consider important. This has significant implications for mixed-species emergency protocols, the director noted. If humans can survive substantially longer than other species in oxygen-depleted environments, they should be designated for specific roles in emergency response. We're already seeing that in practical application, I confirmed. Human personnel are increasingly requested for emergency response teams specifically because of their unusual survival capabilities and their tendency to prioritize others' safety over their own. 3 months after the initial tests, Lieutenant Chen set a new station record of 16 minutes and 22 seconds, achieved during a meditation demonstration she conducted for the xenophysiology research team. She explained the breathing techniques, showed how to trigger the mammalian diving reflex voluntarily, demonstrated the mental state required for extreme metabolic suppression. It's not magic, Chen explained during the demonstration. It's just training your body and mind to work together efficiently. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We just had to learn because we didn't have natural advantages, so we created advantages through practice and technique. But why? I asked, the same question I had been asking since this research began. Why invest such enormous effort into abilities you rarely need? Because we can, Chen said simply. Because limits bother us. Because being told we can't do something makes us want to prove we can. Because humans are fundamentally stubborn, competitive, and refuse to accept that biology is destiny. We'd rather spend years training to hold our breath for absurd durations than accept that species with bigger lungs are just better at it than we are, she smiled. Plus, it's useful. Survival training, emergency preparedness, competitive sports, meditation practice, lots of practical applications. But mostly, it's about pushing boundaries because boundaries are annoying and humans don't like being told what we can't do. I spent the next year completely revising human respiratory models, incorporating psychological factors, training effects, social motivation, all the non-biological elements that significantly impacted human performance. The new models were substantially more accurate but also more complex, requiring inputs that couldn't be measured through simple physiology scans. Human capability assessment is as much psychology as biology, I wrote in my revised research paper. Physical specifications provide baseline, but actual performance is heavily influenced by training, motivation, social context, and individual determination. Standard biological models are insufficient for predicting human behavior in extreme conditions. The paper was well received, though several colleagues complained that I had made human physiology unnecessarily complicated by introducing psychological variables into what should be straightforward biological analysis. That's because humans are unnecessarily complicated, I told Dr. Yalith. They refuse to behave according to simple biological models. They train themselves to exceed normal limitations, they push past pain and discomfort through sheer stubbornness, and they perform impossibly well when protecting others. You can't model that with standard respiratory equations, have you told them that? Yalith asked. Told who what? told humans that they're unnecessarily complicated and refuse to behave according to biological models they know, I said. Chen told me humans specifically enjoy exceeding expectations and proving predictions wrong. They're aware they're difficult to model. They consider it a feature, not a bug. That's very human, Yalith observed. Yes, I agreed. That's exactly the problem. They put the human in the zero oxygen test until she outlasted 3 species with double lung capacity. Then they tried to understand how, which required completely revising every assumption about the relationship between biology and capability. Because humans don't just have respiratory systems, they have respiratory systems plus training plus motivation plus cultural practices that teach them to push beyond normal limits plus psychological factors that activate when social bonds are involved plus sheer stubborn refusal to accept that bigger lungs automatically mean better performance. You can't model that with simple biology. You need to account for the fact that humans see physiological limitations as challenges to overcome rather than boundaries to accept, that they spend years training to exceed normal capabilities, that they perform impossibly well when protecting others, and that telling them something is biologically impossible just makes them more determined to do it anyway. My name is Dr. Thesik Vorn, and I used to think I understood respiratory biology. Now I understand that respiratory biology is only part of the equation when dealing with humans, and possibly not even the most important part. The most important part is understanding that humans are fundamentally competitive, stubborn, and motivated by spite directed at anyone who suggests they can't do something. They put the human in the zero oxygen test, and she won through combination of vestigial diving reflexes, meditation training, metabolic suppression, and absolute refusal to let species with superior lung capacity hold the record. That's not biology, that's culture plus psychology plus determination plus whatever makes humans decide that limits are optional and biology is merely a suggestion. And it's why human emergency survival capabilities are now rated significantly higher than species with objectively superior physical specifications, because we learned that humans don't let things like lung capacity determine their performance when they can simply train harder, push farther, and outlast everyone through pure stubborn persistence. The equipment wasn't malfunctioning. The humans were just being human, which means doing impossible things and acting like it's perfectly normal because they've been doing impossible things for so long that they've forgotten it's supposed to be impossible. That's not a bug in human physiology, that's apparently the core feature, and it makes them simultaneously fascinating to study and incredibly frustrating to model using conventional biological frameworks.